The Geneva Conventions extensively define the basic rights of wartime prisoners, civilians and military personnel, established protections for the wounded and sick, and provided protections for the civilians in and around a war zone. Moreover, the Geneva Convention also defines the rights and protections afforded to non-combatants. The Swiss businessman Henri Dunant went to visit wounded soldiers after the Battle of Solferino in 1859. He was shocked by the lack of facilities, personnel, and medical aid available to help these soldiers. As a result, he published his book, A Memory of Solferino, in 1862, on the horrors of war. His wartime experiences inspired Dunant to propose a permanent relief agency for humanitarian aid in times of war. A government treaty recognizing the neutrality of the agency and allowing it to provide aid in a war zone. Representatives of 12 states and kingdoms signed the convention. Swiss Confederation, Grand Duchy of Baden, Kingdom of Belgium, Kingdom of Denmark, Kingdom of Spain, French Empire, Grand Duchy of Hesse, Kingdom of Italy, Kingdom of the Netherlands, Kingdom of Portugal and the Algarves, Kingdom of Prussia, Kingdom of Württemberg. For both of these accomplishments, Henri Dunant became co-recipient of the first Nobel Peace Prize in 1901. Inspired by the wave of humanitarian and pacifistic enthusiasm following World War II and the outrage towards the war crimes disclosed by the Nuremberg trials, a series of conferences were held in 1949 reaffirming, expanding, and updating the prior Geneva and Hague Conventions. It yielded 4 distinct conventions. The first Geneva Convention for the amelioration of the condition of the wounded and sick in armed forces in the field was the fourth update of the original 1864 convention and replaced the 1929 convention on the same subject matter. The Geneva Conventions are rules that apply only in times of armed conflict and seek to protect people who are not or are no longer taking part in hostilities. These include the sick and wounded of armed forces on the field, wounded, sick, and shipwrecked members of armed forces at sea, prisoners of war, and civilians. The first convention dealt with the treatment of wounded and sick armed forces in the field. The second convention dealt with the sick, wounded, and shipwrecked members of armed forces at sea. The third convention dealt with the treatment of prisoners of war during times of conflict. The fourth convention dealt with the treatment of civilians and their protection during wartime. During the negotiations for the 1949 conventions, Britain and France successfully removed language from early drafts that they saw as unfavorable to their colonial rule. In international law and diplomacy, the term convention refers to an international agreement, or treaty. The first Geneva Convention for the amelioration of the condition of the wounded and sick in armed forces in the field. The second Geneva Convention for the amelioration of the condition of wounded, sick and shipwrecked members of armed forces at sea. The third Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war. The fourth Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war. With two Geneva Conventions revised and adopted, and the second and fourth added, in 1949 the whole set is referred to as the Geneva Conventions of 1949 or simply the Geneva Conventions. Usually only the Geneva Conventions of 1949 are referred to as First, Second, Third, or Fourth Geneva Convention. The treaties of 1949 were ratified, in whole or with reservations, by 196 countries. Artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons systems, such as military robots and cyber weapons, are creating challenges in the creation, interpretation, and application of the laws of armed conflict. The complexity of these new challenges, as well as the speed in which they are developed, complicates the application of the conventions, which have not been updated in a long time. Adding to this challenge is the very slow speed of the procedure of developing new treaties to deal with new forms of warfare, and determining agreed upon interpretations to existing ones, meaning that by the time a decision can be made, armed conflict may have already evolved in a way that makes the changes obsolete.